last week we had an interesting situation. Elise Labot is a reporter for CNN, and after there was a vote on the refugee situation, she tweeted out, House passes bill that could limit Syrian refugees. Statue of Liberty bows head in anguish. Now, look, she didn't say she was for the Democrats. She didn't say she was agree with Obama's position, but you can tell. I mean, she's saying the Statue of Liberty bows, said that's actually not in dispute because the Statue of Liberty, not a real person, but has a very clear plaque on it that says, give me your poor, your wretched refuse of the world, and I'll give them shelter. I'll give them a golden door. So if you are refusing the refugees that the Statue of Liberty says it welcomes, well, it is against the ideal of the Statue of Liberty. That is true. But it seems to indicate a certain position that she thinks that, you know, again, I struggle because it's a fact of the statue. It says that on the Statue of Liberty. So you can't make the counter argument that the Statue of Liberty would, the people who gave it to us, the people who put that plaque up, what it stands for would be against refugees. That's the whole point of the Statue of Liberty, is to be pro-refugees and immigrants that are coming in. Okay. Anyway, but you can still tell. You can still tell that she didn't agree with the vote. Okay, she's a reporter, so CNN is very upset about this. A bias. We won't let that kind of liberal bias in here. Okay, so they suspend her for a couple of weeks. Now, Glenn Greenwald goes on Brian Stelter's program, Reliable Sources, on CNN over the weekend, and he engages in a debate on this issue and would like to point out the hypocrisy of what CNN is doing. Now, I want to show you that debate, and then I'll back it up with video examples from CNN. So let's watch.
Brian, you have had CNN, not you personally, but CNN has had John Brennan, multiple tapes of him over and over, has had former CIA Jim Woolsey who has come on, zero pushback, zero questioning. A reporter stood up in President Obama's press conference and said, why can't we take these bastards out, essentially pushing the president towards war in Syria. This is the kind of opinionating that comes forth from CNN all the time.
Let's talk about that quote.
Never punish. You're allowed to demonize Muslims.
What I thought Acosta was doing, and I want to hear your take, was trying to express what folks in America are feeling and thinking right now, that dissatisfaction with the president's response to ISIS. Is it not appropriate for the press to hold the president, even a Democratic, even a liberal president, accountable in that way?
I actually think that it's totally appropriate for the CNN host with Yasser Yaloudi to express their repugnant opinions. I think it's appropriate for Jim Acosta to voice what American people are saying. But I also think it's appropriate for Elise Labot to go onto Twitter and to speak critically in the mildest way about the U.S. Congress and stand up for the most marginalized people, Syrian refugees.
So you're saying all opinion. Let's hear all the opinion.
Elise Labot gets punished, but the two CNN anchors and Jim Acosta and all kinds of CNN anchors who speak critically of Muslims aren't punished. And the message that's sent is you're free to stoke anti-Muslim animosity in the United States, but what you're not free to do is to defend Muslims. And
I hear what you're saying. I personally haven't heard anti-Muslim rhetoric on this network in the way you're describing.
I think it's great that Christiane Amanpour can go on CNN all the time and demand that President Obama intervene in Syria, that he attack ISIS with ground troops, that she expresses whatever opinions she wants. That, to me, is journalism, is criticizing politicians. That's why Elise did nothing wrong as well. And the fact that CNN singled her out and punished her doesn't show that objectivity is required of CNN reporters. It shows that some opinions are allowed when you want more war, when you want to stigmatize Muslims, but defending Muslims is not allowed. I think that's what that signal is sent.
I don't think that's true about Christiane, but it's different when you're a correspondent in Washington who's actively covering something like the refugee debate.
So let's break this down because there's two different issues here, right? So Glenn mentions the anti-Muslim rhetoric that he hears on CNN from time to time. Now, there was an interview very recently after the Paris attacks where two CNN anchors asked a Muslim leader in Europe whether he would basically apologize for what ISIS did. Now, that seemed weird. He said, what are you talking about? Muslims were killed in the attack? What would Muslim leaders in Europe that are peaceful have anything to do with the ISIS, attacks? And it's like asking anytime there's a white shooter in America for a random church leader to go and apologize, or a random white leader, whatever that might be, to go apologize. They did it. They did it on CNN. Okay, you say, oh, well, I don't know about that. How about Don Lemon? He had a Muslim civil rights leader here in America, and listen to what he says at the end of the interview.
Do you have a problem with these cartoons, the way they depict the Prophet Muhammad?
No, not at all. And I think that if you surveyed the vast majority of Muslims around the world, they would certainly say that the killing of innocent civilians is not only murder, but it's also against any normative mainstream teachings of Islam.
Their words and what you're saying, no, that's not always a reality of what many people think about Islam.
Yeah, but Don, it's important to not conflate the actions of a very few to a population of 1.7 billion people, which represents 20% of the world's population.
Newsweek found back in August that 16% of French citizens support ISIS. Would you describe those who support ISIS as Islamic extremists?
Well, they obviously, have sympathies for that ideology. I don't think that would mean that they would justify the killing of innocent civilians or murdering people on the streets.
But I just want to get more specific. Again, in August, 16% of French citizens support ISIS. Would you describe those who support ISIS as Islamic extremists? Do you support ISIS?
Wait, did you just ask if I support ISIS?
That's a human rights lawyer that he's talking to. But you see how that jump happened? Some radical Muslims did a violent attack. Well, I showed you a poll where other people generally agree with that group, okay? That number is way too high. And then here's a human rights lawyer who's Muslim. I jumped to, hey, do you support ISIS? I mean, you're a Muslim. Why else would he ask him? Would he have asked him if he was Christian? Probably not, right? So that's on CNN right there. So, I mean, there's a number of examples. There's two of them right there. The interview right after the Paris attacks, this interview right there. Human rights lawyer, you're Muslim. Do you support terrorists? Okay, all right. Now, the second issue is, and I think actually, to be honest, a much more important issue, which is if you hold liberal positions, that's biased, and you'll be suspended. But if you support pro-war positions, well, no, there'll never be any consequences for that. So now there's smaller examples here. Jim Acosta saying, what are you going to do about these bastards in reference to the ISIS attack in Paris when he asked the president. Now, they are bastards, so that's not that controversial. But it seemed to implicate that you need to do something that is more military because the president was just talking about putting in more ground troops does not make sense, okay? So, but you could say, hey, that's subtle. I don't count that one. Okay. But then Glenn points out, you have these former CIA directors who come on here and who say, oh, we got to have more ground forces. We got to do more war. We got to do more bombing. There was just a report in the New York Times today about the Inspector General of the Pentagon saying that intelligence analysts say that the airstrikes and further military campaigns are not working in defeating ISIS. But the CIA directors, former CIA directors, come on, Jim Woolsey, who's an enormous neoconservative, loved the Iraq war, pushed for it aggressively, pushing for a war with Iran, comes out and says, oh yeah, the only answer is violence and more war and bombings, and we got to be tough and we got to do this and we got to do that. Is there any pushback on that? No, CNN anchors are like, oh, have at it, Hoss. No challenge of that whatsoever. Okay, now, finally, let's go to Christiane Amanpour, because Stelter there said, hey, I don't think that's what Christiane did. That's interesting because she's on tape. So let's see if she has an opinion on whether the president should do more ground forces, ground troops, which she specifically said in the speech before she came out and said these comments on CNN. He said he was not for ground troops. And then Amanpour said this.
He said something that was pretty incredible, according to many of the military experts here and around the world who I've spoken to, that our strategy is working. People do not believe that to be the case. The only strategy that's working is the strategy that he tends to dismiss, and that's the ground troop strategy. Sinjar, Tikrit, Kobani, those are the only ISIS strongholds that have been taken back by a combination of American intelligence and air power and local ground forces, whether they're Iranian-backed militias in Tikrit, whether they're Kurdish Peshmerga and other Kurdish forces in Sinjar and in Kobani. This is a fact. When
Elise Labot comes out and says the Statue of Liberty would be in favor of taking in refugees, an unbelievable liberal bias. You got to get her off the air right now. Now, the president comes out and says, we're not going to do ground troops. Amanpour comes out and says, the only thing that can work is ground troops. Well, that seems to be a political opinion, doesn't it? No, she said, it's a fact. Her opinion is a fact, right? Did she get suspended? I didn't see the suspension. Now, I'll tell you why I laugh at that opinion. First of all, we did ground troops in Iraq. How did that turn out? Did that work out great? No. ISIS arose out of that. So what happened to the fact that ground troops work? No, that's what caused the mess in the first place. Did I hear that on CNN? No, I didn't. I heard somebody come out here and say they talked to military experts. Oh, surprisingly, military experts are in favor of further military action. But that's not an opinion. That's just the military experts who are always right, according to CNN, saying that the only answer is ground troops. And did you notice the little rhetorical trick she did? It's like the old days in the lead up to the Iraq War. 9/11, Saddam Hussein. 9/11, Saddam Hussein. I didn't say Saddam Hussein did 9/11. I just mentioned them in the same sentence. And then right before the war, because the media did such an abhorrent job of telling the American people the truth, 70% of Americans believed that Saddam Hussein had personally attacked us on 9/11. Well, that was CNN's failure. That was the mainstream media's failure. And they're doing it again. Amanpour says, ground troops, who were actually Kurdish Peshmerga and other troops, did it, and hence the only answer as a fact is ground troops. But those weren't American ground troops. Those were not American ground troops. And then she'll turn around and say, I didn't say that. I didn't say American ground troops. I said the opposite. I said the only answer is ground troops. It's Peshmerga and other people that are not Americans. Anyway, what? That's not an opinion. If you have a conservative opinion, you get applauded, you get rewarded, you get promoted. If you have even a smidgen of a progressive opinion, or actually, if you're representing the Statue of Liberty, an American opinion, a core American ideal, bias, you're removed from the air. What does that do? It sends a message. Don't you ever have a progressive opinion on CNN or any of the mainstream media. You will be kicked out. But if you have an opposite opinion, have at it, Hoss. We'll say, oh, it's cherry picking, it's this, it's that. We'll excuse it. There'll never be any consequences. If you do war propaganda on CNN, you'll be celebrated as an expert, as a correspondent, as Amanpour is, right? Their top correspondent, and you will be shown all the respect in the world. This is how our media lies us into wars. If you don't like it, that's not my issue, that's your issue, because you're the one doing it. Young Turks.